learning the sugya of Pikuach Nefesh and Yehorik Val Yavar and Gibel Averis Chamuros on Daf Ayin Daled Omid Beis. And we had the Shita of the Ramach, Rav Moshe Cohen, if you recall, that was quoted by the Kesef Mishnah in Parakeh Mehilchas Yisodei HaTorah. And according to the Ramach, we don't have a halach of ones when you're required to give up your life. If you have to make a decision, which is more important, your life or the Avera, and the Torah says you have to give up your life, then if you fail to do so, you're not an onus. An onus would only apply in a case where they forced him to do the Avera against his will. And the Rambam says that if he violates the Avera and he doesn't give up his life, he's not going to be punished. Meaning that the Rambam still applies Pikuach Nefesh even in Gimel Averos Chamuros. And that means that there's no heter to violate the Avera because of Pikuach Nefesh. And we could say that Pikuach Nefesh on the one side of the scale is equal to the Isur on the other side of the scale. And at that point, you have a chiyuv of Kiddush HaShem, to be Mekadosh Shem Shemayim, and to remain in a passive position of Shevi Al Taseh. So that the Rama would hold that if he violates the Gimel Averis Chamuros, he's not going to be punished in Bezdin because there is a matir of V'chai B'hem V'lo Shiyomas B'hem, this Pikuach Nefesh. Again, on the other side of the scale, again, weighing in against Pikuach Nefesh is the Avera Chamura, but it equals out. And therefore, he's not going to be punished according to this approach, not because of ones, because he made that decision, as we saw in the Ramach, but rather because of Pikuach Nefesh. Now, in the past, we've mentioned the Baal HaMaor. The Baal HaMaor is printed in the Dapei Arif on page Yud Zayin Omid Beis. And the Baal HaMaor says that there's a heter called Hanos Atzman with regard to the Gimel Averos Chamuros. Now, what does that mean? What difference does it make whether the guy is interested in Hanos Atzman, in his own pleasure, like, for example, the case of Achashverosh? What bearing should that have on Gimel Averos Chamuros? And the Baal HaMaor is saying that the reason why, based on Rava, Esther was permitted to have this relationship with Achashverosh is because of Hanos Atzma, because Achashverosh was motivated by his own Hana. Okay, so we thought that has to do with Kiddush Hashem, but the Baal HaMaor is learning that this is referring to Gimel Averos Chamuros, meaning to Gili Arayos. Where and what sense can we make out of a mitigating circumstance, a mitigating factor of Hanos Atzma Shani with regard to the Avera of Gili Arayos? And we could formulate the question in a little different way. What motivates the Ma'anes, right, or the Anos, if you want to call them the Anos, in forcing the Jew? Is he just interested in attacking the Jew, or is he motivated by his own hana. Why should that make any difference? We're talking about the Chumras Avera of Gilui Arayos, which is being equated with Ritzicha. It's on the highest level of an Avera Chamura. So, okay, the guy is motivated because of Hanas Atzma. He wants to have a good time. So what? That's not going to change the Gilui Arayos. That's not going to reduce the severity of the crime of Gilui Arayos, the Chumras Avera. So let's go back to the svar that we had before called Shkulim Hem. What does that mean? That we have on the scale Pikuach Nefesh and V'chai Bohem on one side, and we have the Chumras Avera on the other side of Gilui Arayos. And they equal each other out. It's a balanced scale. So there's a matir pikuach nefesh, but that matir pikuach nefesh cannot override the chumras havera of the gimel averas chamuras because they equal each other out. So now we said that the mitzvah of Kiddush Hashem requires him to be Shevi Al Taseh. He's got to be passive. He's got to be willing to give up his life rather than violate, let's say, Gilui Arayos, because the V'chai Bohem is equaled out by the Chumras Avera of Gilui Arayos, and now the Torah says, give up your life and be Mekadesh Shem Shamayim. So the Baal HaMaor is saying that if Kiddush Hashem as a mitzvah is coming to generate the ruling, right? The main thrust of what he has to do here in this case is Kiddush Hashem, because otherwise he's in a stalemate situation. He's got Pikuach Nefesh on the one hand, but Chai Bohem on the other hand, he's got Chumras Avera. So we come to a standstill. So what's going to motivate the halacha of Yeharg Val Yavar that he has to be willing to die rather than violate Gilui Arayos? It's going to be Kiddush Hashem. If it's Kiddush Hashem, then we could ask what motivates the guy. Is the guy forcing the Jew to do this Avera because of Hanas Atzman? So there's no real element here of Chil Hashem. Let's say that Kiddush Hashem is the flip side of Chil Hashem. And Chil Hashem, the desecration of God's name, is when the guy is trying to get the Jew to violate his Torah. To try to, let's call it, metaphorically, let's say, to give up his religion for the sake of his life. That's the Chil Hashem. That the Jew, for the sake of his own life, is going to desecrate his Torah. That's Chil Hashem. And Kiddush Hashem would be when the Jew is willing to die rather than violate the Torah. Comes on the Baal HaMaor, he says this for a pshuta now, that if it's Hanas Atzmo Shiny, there's no Chil Hashem. There's no statement here on the part of the guy, look at this Jew. This Jew gave up and violated his basic laws and principles of his faith for the sake of his own life. What a desecration in the name of God. The guy's not saying that. The guy's just going for, pardon the expression, a joyride. That's all. He's not trying to demonstrate that the Jew would save his life even if he has to give up his religion. That's the furthest thing from the mind of the guy. And again, the typical example is Achashverosh. He doesn't even know that Esther is Jewish. So he's not trying to get anyone to violate the Torah. He's just a pleasure seeker. So that's not Chil Hashem and Kiddush Hashem. And therefore, she's allowed to activate the principle of Pikuach Nefesh and violate Gili Arayis because there's no factor here, there's no agency, if I could use that term, of Kiddush Hashem based on Hanos Asman Shiny. I'm not 100% comfortable with this because we introduced Kiddush Hashem here because there was a stalemate here between Pikuach Nefesh and Gili Arayis. And Rava is not operating with Karka Olam like Abaye. So Rava is not putting the emphasis here on the fact that Esther, was totally passive here. So we're looking at Esther according to the Baal HaMaor from the perspective, within Rava, from the perspective of Gili Arayis as an Avera Chamura. And I don't know if Pikuach Nefesh could override the Chumras Avera of Gili Arayis. So even if we introduce the Kosav Ashlishi of Kiddush Hashem as the final Machriya here, and will therefore side and support the Baal HaMaor's position that there's no Chil Hashem and Kiddush Hashem in Hanos Atzmon, but I still don't understand how the matir of a Chai Bohem could override Gili Arayis. Because as we said before, over and over again, Hanos Atzman Shiny does not change in any way or diminish the severity of Gili Arayis. Now, clearly, if we're going to say that as a result of the Chumras Avera, the Baal HaMaor would agree that there's no Pikuach Nefesh, there's no matir of Chai Bohem, then we're really stuck. Because then, how could the Baal HaMaor possibly say that there's a heter of Hanos Atzman, and therefore he doesn't have to give up his life? When you're saying that the Chumras Avera of Gili Arayis completely does away with the matir of Chai Bohem. If that be the case, then there's no matir over Chai Bohem. I'm sorry, over Gili Arayis. And where does Hanos Atzman shine a candle over here? Where does it play any role? So therefore, it must be that the Baal HaMaor is accepting the matir of Pikuach Nefesh, even in the case of the Avera Chamura of Gili Arayis. However, the matir of a Chai Bohem is not powerful enough to trump the Chumras Avera. So we got Shkulim Heim again. We're back to a stalemate. And Memela, what do we introduce here as the Kosav Ashlishi, the agency that is Machriya here will be Kiddush Hashem. And Kiddush Hashem in this case let me see if we can figure this out. So Kiddush Hashem. Kiddush Hashem is going to tell you that you have to be passive. What do I mean? You have to be willing to die rather than capitulate, rather than accept the onus here and violate the Avera Chamura. Okay, so now what are we saying? That Kiddush Hashem tells you to be passive, even if it means that you'll die. In other words, you cannot actively violate the Chumras Avera because it's equal to the Chai Bohem. So the Kiddush Hashem here will be through passivity, through Shevi Altas. Because again, Kiddush Hashem could not force you to give up your life in an active way, like you wouldn't have to kill yourself, because you still have the matter of pikuach nefesh. But Kiddush Hashem says to be passive. Don't comply, and don't jump off a roof. Just be passive. Comes on the Baal HaMaor and he says, but there's no Chil Hashem here because it's Hanos Asma Shiny, and therefore you're allowed to violate the Aver. Yeah, but even if there's no Kiddush Hashem, see, that's the point I don't understand. Why do I need Kiddush Hashem in order to establish that you should be passive? Maybe because a person has a right to say, V'chai b'hem. Right? I'll do whatever I have to do to save my life. Because the Torah commands me, V'chai b'hem. Yeah, but V'chai b'hem doesn't override the Avera Chamura. So why, this is where I get stuck in the Baal HaMaor. Why do I need Kiddush Hashem as another element? We called it the Chasav Ashlishi Amachriya. When you have this stalemate, you've got Pikuach Nefesh on one side equaled out to the Chumas Avera on the other side, and then you're going to tell me, well, the Chasav Ashlishi Amachriya B'neihem is going to be Kiddush Hashem. That's the point I don't understand in the Baal HaMaor. Why? Even without Kiddush Hashem, forget it. Let's say there's no mitzvah of Kiddush Hashem, but you have the Chumas Avera that prevents you from being a partner in Gili Arayos. I guess what we're saying here, and this is the pill that I'm having trouble swallowing, is that once we get to the point of a stalemate, then we have not yet deactivated V'chai b'hem. V'chai b'hem is still very much active as a counterbalance, a counterforce against the Chumas Avera. And what we would say here is that now the ball's in your court to make that decision. You are within the legal bounds, the halachic bounds, and your rights to save your life because there is V'chai b'hem. Even if it means violating the Avera because they're shkulim. And that's where we have to introduce Kiddush Hashem. Are you able to follow this? This last point is a very, very subtle point. What do you do in a case of a stalemate between Pikuach Nefesh and Chumas Avera? So what we're suggesting is that you'd be allowed to do anything in your power to save your life, even to violate Chumas Avera. Because when you're going to come back to me and say, wait a minute, you just violated an Avera Chamura, I'm going to say, but Pikuach Nefesh is Matir. So you're going to tell me, well, Pikuach Nefesh doesn't take me over the hump. You know, it's only equal to, but not greater than the Chumas Avera. Okay, fine, but I still have Pikuach Nefesh. We haven't undermined Pikuach Nefesh. It still is a very live, active legal factor here. And as an active factor, it allows me to save my life, even at the expense of violating a chumas aver. But really, in pure theory, you should be passive, shevi alta, so you can't make a decision one way or the other, because you don't know which is greater. Because both pikuach nefesh and chumas aver are equal. So here is where the Torah says, v'chai bohem. I'm sorry. Slip of the tongue. Here's where the Torah says Kiddush Hashem. And Kiddush Hashem forces you to be passive. And it robs you of the opportunity to say, well, I'm going to apply the Chai Bohem and save my life and activate, because Chai Bohem is alive. No. Chai Bohem doesn't play a role because of Kiddush Hashem. Comes along Baal HaMaor and he says, there's no Chil Hashem, there's no Kiddush Hashem, and therefore we go back to square one, that in this stalemate, you have a right to protect your life, even at the expense of violating the Avera Chamura of Gilui Arayos. Okay. Now, after the Baal HaMaor presents his thesis that Pikuach Nefesh and V'chai Bohem equals the Chumas Aver Gilui Arayos, then Kiddush Hashem kicks in, and there's no Kiddush Hashem with Hanos Hasbashini. Now we have the Ramban. The Ramban raises the following kasha on the Baal HaMaor. The Gemara in Psachim on Daf Chof Hei, Bakol Misrapim Chutz Mi'atzei Asher. You could use anything medicinally to save a life, with the exception of Avodah Zarah, Atzei Asher. Now, what's on the scale over here? You have Avodah Zarah on the scale, and you have Pikuach Nefesh on the scale. And the way the Baal HaMaor understood it, they equal each other out. The Chumas Haver Avodah Zarah is equaled by the Chai Bohem V'lo Sheyomas Bohem of Pikuach Nefesh, and therefore we're going to introduce Kiddush Hashem. But the Baal HaMaor says there's no Kiddush Hashem and Hanos Hasbashini. This case is Hanos Hasbashini. Why is he taking from the Atzei Asherah? Only for medicinal purposes. Only to save his life. He's not motivated to violate the Torah, chas v'shalom. The last thing that he wants to do is to violate the Torah and be in violation of benefiting from Avodah Zarah. For sure, he doesn't want that. So where's the Kiddush Hashem over here? It's almost the Kal V'chomer. If the Baal HaMaor says in a case of a guy having a relationship with a Jewish woman, a married woman, we're going to apply the principle of Hanos Hasbashini, and we're going to neutralize Kiddush Hashem, how much more so in case of Misrapim, where no one is forcing him to violate the Torah. He's just trying to save his life. And in a circumstance where he could only save his life by violating one of the Gimel Averes Chamuras, there's no Kiddush Hashem according to the Baal HaMaor. That's the Ramban's kash. And basically, the thrust of the Ramban, or the final bottom line that the Ramban is trying to establish, is that if Akol misrapim chutz mi avodah zorah mi'atzei ashera. It means because of the chomer avera, there's no pikuach nefesh. You want to save your life, you can't save your life by violating avodah zorah. There's no v'chayba. And the same thing should therefore apply to Gilead riots. There's no v'chayba. So forget about whether there's Kiddush Hashem and Anos Atzman, all that is irrelevant. Everything, all the weight here is on the Chumras Havera, which overrides, completely trumps the Pikuach Nefesh. So how is it possible that the Ramban holds that in Anos Atzman, there's a matir even for Gimel Averis Chamuros? So again, from the halacha of Bakol Misrapim Chutz Mi Atzei Ashera, we derive the conclusion that there's no v'chayba, and that applies to avodah zorah and all three gimel averos chamuros. There's no matir of v'chayba, and therefore a misrapim begil averos. You cannot save a person's life if the medicinal application is predicated on violating one of the Gimel Averis Chamuros. So it's very interesting. You want to administer the best health care possible to save the life of a Jew, but in doing so, you'll have to violate one of the Gimel Averis Chamuros. Put v'chai bohev outside. It's puk honey lebra. Put it out of the base measure. There's no v'chai. But yet there's a matir, according to the Baal HaMaor, of hanos atzma. Well, maybe we could say the following. Let's leave out for Chai B'hem, according to the Baal HaMaor. But let's substitute onus in place of a Chai B'hem. So let's say, for example, in the case of Esther, if she doesn't comply with Achashverosh, we know what the consequences will be. I mean, there's a precedent to that, and that's Vashti, So she is being compelled, coerced, against her will, to violate Gili Arayos. And the Baal HaMaor is going to say the following. What do we put on two sides of the scale here? On one side of the scale, we have onus. And the Torah says that onus is not considered a violation of the Torah. What you do under coercion without your deliberate will, that's not a violation of an Issa. But on the other hand, on the other side of the scale, against onus, we have Chumras HaAveira. We have Avodah Zarah, Gili Arayos, Shvichas Damim. In the case of Esther, Gili Arayos. So the Chumras HaAveira is now going to impede or block onus. And why is that so? Because of Kiddush Hashem. So Kiddush Hashem is going to say the following, that although you're not deliberately violating the Torah, give up your life, and that'll be Kiddush Hashem. Right? The fact that your Torah is so important to you, it's so holy, it's so essential to your life, that you're willing to give up your life, that's Kiddush Hashem. But if not for Kiddush Hashem, we would apply the principle of onus. And she would have a right, so to speak, to submit herself to Gili Arayos by claiming, I'm not doing this deliberately, willingly. These are situations that are being coerced, in which I'm coerced. They're being forced upon me. Says the Baal HaMaor, if all things are equal, and there would be no Kiddush Hashem, and all we have on the agenda is to weigh onus against the Chumras HaAveira, then onus would win out. Because the Chumras HaAveira, when coerced onto a person against their will, is not strong enough. It's not powerful enough to override the p'tur of onus, the matir of onus. Onus says you're allowed to do, if it's not willingly, it's not your aveira. It's being thrust upon you. But here there's a mitzvah of Kiddush Hashem. And the mitzvah of Kiddush Hashem says that you now are in a unique position to make a statement that even when you're coerced and you didn't violate the Avera deliberately and willingly, nevertheless, for the sake of the holy name of God, you're willing and prepared to give up your life. That's where the Torah says you're obligated in Kiddush Hashem. Comes along the Baal HaMaor, and he says, wait a minute, there's a built-in condition. It's a Kiddush Hashem when the outside onus, the ma'anes as we called him, was motivated to give you a choice between your life and your Torah. That's when Kiddush Hashem comes in and says, well, in this scenario where you have the opportunity to give up your life, you're obligated to do so, Kiddush Hashem. But if the Anos is not interested at all in your violating your Torah, then that's not Kiddush Hashem. And if it's not Kiddush Hashem, we go back to the din of onus. But the Gemara says, "Bakol misrapim chutz me'avodas kochov." That's a different kind of onus. In that onus, there's no external coercion. No one is bludgeoning you over the head or putting a gun to your temple and saying, I want you to do X. It's not like the case of Achashverosh, where the noose around your neck is sort of hanging. If she would run away from Achashverosh, that would be very bad. But here's a case where a person is not violating the Torah willingly. In that sense, he's an onus. But he's making the decision on his own, weighing the possibilities without any external onus. And in that case, the Baal HaMaor is of the opinion that onus could not mitigate against the Gimel Averos Chamuros. Forget about Kiddush Hashem. It's not an issue of, well, does he want to violate the Torah? Has he put his life above the Torah? No. That's not relevant. The relevancy here is Pikuach Nefesh against an Avera Chamura, and Pikuach Nefesh loses out against the Chumas Avera. Therefore, you have no right to violate Avodah Zarah, even for the sake of saving your life. Onus, the Baal HaMaor holds there's no factor of onus. Onus has to be external onus. And if there's external onus, then the only reason why you would have to give up your life rather than violate one of the Averos Chamuros is because of Kiddush Hashem, and that's where the Baal HaMaor puts in this break, meaning this stopper. And he limits Kiddush Hashem to the case of Lavuri Aldas. But if it's Lanos Atzmo, then there's no Kiddush Hashem. And this is why, if you recall, the Rambam in Perkei Halacha Daled as opposed to Halacha Vav, the Rambam says in Halacha Daled, where there was an external ma'anes, the Rambam says, Ein Malkin oso, Ein Memisan oso, etc., etc. Whereas in Halacha Vav, the Rambam says that in the case of Misrapim, we will hit him with the brunt of the law, and he will be punished. Why isn't he punished in Gimel Averos Chamuros, and yet he's punished in the case of Misrapim? And the answer is because in Halacha Dalet, he's talking about an external ma'anes that puts a gun to his head, and the Rambam holds that there's onus. But in Halacha Vav, where he's misrapim, no one's putting a gun to his head. There's no external onus. It's an internal onus. And if we neutralize the power of the role of onus here, then we're left with Gimel Averos Chamuros. Therefore, the Rambam holds that if he went ahead and he was misrape, we will punish him for violating Avodah Zarah. And the Ramban asked the Kasha, well, according to the Baal HaMaor, why not just apply the principle of Anos Atzvul Shiny? The answer is we're not operating within Kiddush HaShem. We're operating with the onus, and we're saying that this is not an onus because it's internal rather than external. When it's external, then the only reason why in Gimel Averos Chamuros we're not going to apply the principle of onus when there's a real bona fide onus is because the mitzvah of Kiddush HaShem, and that's where the Baal HaMaor says there's no Kiddush HaShem in a case of Hanos Atzvul Shani. Any questions? Comments, criticisms? Okay, Rabbosai, this is where we'll stop for today. It's HaShem will continue tomorrow. Thank you so much.